No amount of great animation will save a bad story. This quote by John Lasseter, legendary animated film director, sums up a sentiment that people in the gaming industry are painfully aware of, one that is finally gaining traction in the feature film animation industry. I agree with this sentiment wholeheartedly, as unfortunately, I'm a bit of a gamer girl myself, and like many others, I've noticed the degradation of the AAA industry that would prefer to pump out mediocre to bad games that have stunning graphics as though it excuses the bad gameplay. As such, I've been saddened and frustrated by the fact that the animation audience and industry hasn't fully taken it to heart, or is even aware of it, or at least it was that way until Avatar. Back when Avatar, the Blue People movie, not the kids show, first came out, all anyone could talk about was the astonishing, revolutionary graphics that simply everyone had to see, and they did. I must have been about 10 at the time, and I still remember everyone scrambling to see this movie. This rush for the graphics put Avatar as the record breaker for box office sales for several years until Infinity War would overtake it. None of this would be relevant if Avatar had come back into the minds of the public conscience, with the revelation that a total of 5 Avatar sequels had already been greenlit, and by the time of writing, not one of them has been released. This caused a rush of people to remember the humble Blue People movie, or rather not remember it, as people came out in waves finally criticizing the movie for its embarrassingly weak story. The type of story that is weak enough to unironically use the phrase unobtainium as the official name for the element that the army wants from the planet. A professional reviewer, Robert Probst, had said the following about the film. While Avatar is largely devoid of humanity, story, dialogue, and character, there's little denying that in terms of its technical achievements, it is nearly unrivaled. This weak story, in combination with its amazing graphics, meant that no one even remembers anything about the movie itself except for the visuals, putting 5 whole sequels in an uncertain position. On a hauntingly similar note, the opposite phenomena can be observed with the TV show Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is a 2D animated TV show that is most notable for its fantastic story. Now, the animation on the show wasn't bad, really it was quite good, but nothing to write home about. But what set it apart was the truly excellent storytelling that writing teachers and students will no doubt be citing as examples of what to do right for a very long time. The point is that the stellar writing elevated the animation and reinforced its purpose, which is why its sequel is so interesting. The sequel to Avatar TLA is Avatar: The Legend of Korra, which has the same animation as the original series at roughly the same quality and style, yet its storytelling was definitely of a lower quality. Far from the same cultural juggernaut as its predecessor, The Legend of Korra is widely regarded by fans to be the lesser of the two. Although some still vehemently defend the property, though even they cannot deny that at crucial moments, Legend of Korra fumbled the metaphorical ball. Circling back to the topic of video games, of which the animation industry has become increasingly entangled with, a long-standing tradition with video games is the graphics debate. A debate wherein the belligerents are of those who mindlessly chase after games with higher and higher pixel counts and resolution and pretty much everyone else. None portray the dichotomy of bad game, good graphics versus good game, bad graphics than the indie gaming sphere. This dichotomy has been reinforced all the more since retro nostalgia for the likes of the 8 and 16-bit gaming era, as well as the PS2 era, have been insanely popular, and have made many indie developers very rich. As such, bad graphics have been running amok among the indie scene. An obvious success story from this binary is Undertale, a critically acclaimed video game with graphics based on the 16-bit era. As such, there's not really much to look at with its simple yet admittedly charming pixel art style. However, this art style is a far cry from the graphical heights that AAA developers are able to attain. Yet Undertale was able to surpass most AAA games in quality due to the phenomenal emotional writing alongside its stellar score. Undertale became an instant classic, recreating the same warmth as a Ghibli film, but still making you sob like a Pixar film, through its emotional storytelling that makes every character stand out and feel incredibly real. On a different note, animated TV shows tend to have animation that is lesser than a feature film due to budgetary and time reasons. But much like the previously mentioned Avatar TLA, that isn't necessarily a death sentence, as even TV shows with terrible animation can achieve great success through outstanding story writing, which helps you suffer through the bad animation. One such example of this is Reboot, a Canadian TV show which was the very first of its kind, a TV show that was entirely CG. Now, being the very first of its kind and being a CGI product from the 90s, it naturally is hard to look at, and the animation can be very jumpy and unrefined due to technical limitations of the time, but they made it work. Despite its graphics, the writing staff were able to cook up a story good enough to make even young kids look past the bad animation and still maintains a cult following to this day. On a similar note, a much smaller production, Red vs. Blue, is in a similar situation. Red vs. Blue is an indie web series from 2003 based on the Halo franchise that has since been picked up by Rooster Teeth. However, the original Red vs. Blue episodes weren't even made using any kind of animation software, but were instead recorded within the game itself. Despite this, the show has gone on to receive multiple different seasons, awards, and accolades, and has immersed itself within meme culture. If games and TV shows can reach such high levels of acclaim despite poor graphical quality, then clearly the writing and storytelling hold serious sway over how it is perceived in the end. Now, some people will argue that the animation will speak for itself and will transcend above a bad story. However, given the current state of the indie genre and its burgeoning success as an industry, and the occasional commercial failure of a gorgeously animated movie with weak stories such as Frozen 2 and The Good Dinosaur, it seems clear to me that isn't the case. It is true that great graphics can motivate people to see a movie despite its weak stories, such as with Avatar, but as it showed us, it will leave people indifferent to the product and later questioning its worth altogether. The argument that holds the most weight to me is that the corporations that make these movies, games, and TV shows don't care if the story is bad. As long as the graphics entice enough people to go watch it in the cinema and buy merchandise later, it's all the same to them. And honestly, they're right. So long as people keep showing up to see these films and still buy merchandise despite the fact they can't remember a single line from it, no doubt these corporations will keep churning these things out. God only knows that the AAA gaming industry has. But there is a ray of hope, as the commercial failure of films like The Good Dinosaur and the later audience indifference to Avatar has shown that people are actually becoming aware of this in the films they watch. Nowadays, they want the films they see and the films that top the charts to be relevant, and something they actually remember, like Infinity War. As my examples have illustrated, nobody remembers a single thing about Avatar. There are still people enjoying and rewatching and creating fanworks for things like Reboot and Undertale. For visuals are usually fleeting, but stories make us feel emotions, and we end up remembering those feelings more. So, no amount of great animation will save a bad story. That appears to be true, but what do we even do with that information? It's definitely not to discourage artists from making the best products they can make, but it does give a certain amount of freedom to indie developers and artists. As it means they do not have to measure themselves to the heights of the industry, but are free to pick a simpler or stylized look to prop up their story. It also means that the story you write has to be good. Otherwise, you might waste the effort of yourself and the animators. It also means that if you have a creative vision for a story, it is almost certainly worth following through on. And likewise, it means that if you don't have a story, probably not a great idea. And on a similar vein, it does act as a bit of a vetting system to stop just corporate cash grabs, though some people still see those. But overall, I think this is quite inspiring, almost. So yeah, make good stories. Simple enough.